Let's now turn to sociocultural research. Relational dialectics is a very well-known theory, especially in interpersonal communication. And the idea here is that relationships are really a tug-of-war of necessary tensions. And social life is a dynamic knot of contradictions, of a ceaseless interplay between contrary or opposing tendencies. All relationships have tensions. They have that push-pull dynamic. They are completely unavoidable, and you shouldn't necessarily. And if you have these, you shouldn't consider them a real issue or problem in the sense that they're not unique to your relationship. All relationships share these dynamics. That's part of what being in a relationship means. And so it's much better to recognize that these tensions exist in all relationships, and then figure out how to best manage them in your particular relationship. So both parties create and experience these tensions, both people in the relationship. And these tensions can be in any kind of relationship: father-son, mother-daughter, sibling, friend, significant other, etc. There are three main dialectics that we'll discuss, and as you can see, these two stick figures here are almost touching their hands. It's so close, but they're not quite touching their hands. Every time I look at this image there at the bottom right, I get really annoyed. I'm just like, look, either touch hands or back away, because that tension there, that little tiny visual gap of attention between their hands, is making me crazy. So I love that image because it displays what some of these tensions sometimes feel like. The first and most common one that I've experienced is connectedness and separateness, sometimes called integration and separation. And that is that people have a desire to be connected in a relationship, but we also have a desire to be separate, to be on our own, because we are still individual people. And it's very rare that both people have an identical desire to be connected. And some people want just a little bit more space than others. Even if you're with someone all day, maybe the other person wants to be together all day and you just need a half an hour of time to yourself because you're a little more introverted or so forth. It doesn't mean you aren't interested in the relationship and don't want to hang around with that person. It just means that there's a balance. And you can't be 100% connected because you lose complete sense of individuality, and probably you're going to lose a part of what made things interesting in that relationship in the first place. So you have various levels of connectedness and separateness, and that's going to create some friction. So I went on my honeymoon with my wife, and we did not live together before the honeymoon. We kind of did things the old-fashioned way. And so when we went on the honeymoon, I didn't go away, right? She was kind of shocked that this guy, me, was hanging around all the time and wouldn't leave her alone. I didn't necessarily feel that way because I didn't know that was going on in her head. But so we went to Hawaii, and it's beautiful. And so the first day, we go swimming and snorkeling on the beach that's right out in front of the hotel we were at. And it was amazing, right? And then that night we went to dinner, and the next day we went to the top of a volcano, a dormant volcano, and then we went on a hike, and we did all these amazing things. And so by about day 4, my wife said to me, I said, what do you want to do today, Aaron? And she said, I just want to read on the balcony. And I said, okay, that sounds fantastic. I brought a book, and then there's this kind of awkward pause, and she said to me, well, Alex, what I said was I want to read on the balcony. You can go to the beach. And so this is day 4, and what she felt was she felt smothered because she lived on her own before this, and she had lots of separateness that we never recognized because we never were forced to recognize it. She has a much higher need for separateness than I do. But it wasn't a problem that's unique in that sense. And that is that every different relationship you have various levels of connectedness and separateness. And we're actually pretty similar in our levels of need for connection and separateness. I mean, it took 4 days for her to want a little alone time. That's, if you think about the scheme of things, that's a while. And I was probably almost ready for some downtime as well. But that's one of the ways things show up. Even if you're really close in your desire for connectedness and separateness, you probably will not be exactly the same, and so it'll feel like you have a big issue. Certainty and uncertainty is another push-pull dynamic, another dialectic. This is the same thing as stability or change. Some people like things to be very predictable. They don't like anything unexpected to happen, like the hobbits in Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit. They say that they're quiet people and they don't like anything unexpected. And other people are on the other side, and they like uncertainty, they like change, they like variety and novelty. And so in your friendships and relationships, sometimes it'll come up where someone will say, hey, let's go to get some food at Jimmy Z's. And the other that's a certainty person. And the other person says, oh, come on, we always go to Jimmy Z's. Let's go somewhere different. They want change. The person says, well, we always go to Jimmy Z's because it's amazing and I know what I'm going to get. That's certainty. The person says, yeah, but come on, it's boring. We need some variety. That's uncertainty. So people have these tensions that they experience. And again, the person's not wrong for either wanting to go to that restaurant or not. It's just that they have different levels of need for certainty and uncertainty, and then it shows up as a little bit of a clash. Openness and closedness is another area. Some people like to express themselves, some people don't. And openness and closeness is common where one person might want to be a little more talkative, the other person doesn't want to share as much, especially about more personal topics. And openness and closeness is not always a general dialectic. It might be just about certain issues. So some people might be fairly open about many things, but there's a few issues that they're closed off about. They don't want to go there. And so you often see that tension in a relationship where one person is more open and talkative about those delicate issues and other people are more closed. For example, I was 31 when I got married, and I never want to talk or hear about anybody that my wife dated before she married me. That is a closed topic, because if I start hearing about it, I get kind of crazy. Like she'll say, one of her old boyfriends, his name was Sebastian, and she'll talk about Sebastian, and I will say, if I ever meet this guy Sebastian, I'm going to smash his face in, But don't think I'm crazy. That's kind of a joke, because Sebastian was her boyfriend in 4th grade. But I don't want to talk about it, and I'm not kidding about that part of it. I'm not gonna fight this guy, but I don't want to talk about it, right? However, I could bring up an ex-girlfriend of mine, and it doesn't seem to bother my wife at all. And she has said so. She doesn't care. It's not like she loves hearing about a past relationship, but it just doesn't bother her. And so she's open about it. So she'll sometimes bring these things up, and I have to remind her, it's just not something I want to talk about. So this openness, closeness can be a general openness and closeness, or it can be specific to a topic or issue. Identity management is fairly straightforward, and we talk about it here because it has a lot to do with dialectics. But our identity is established, according to this theory, and maintained and changed within our relationships. So again, this is not about personality, not about traits, to refer to another lecture that we did already, but it's about how the other person shapes us and how we shape them. This identity management is very noticeable, especially in intercultural relationships. So there's more difference there in terms of how we see ourselves than if you're from a very similar culture. The main dialectic I want to highlight is called self-other-face dialectic. And in this push-pull tension, we want to support the other person's identity, but we also want to assert our own. And so you want to understand them, you want to affirm who they are and what they're interested in, but you also want to maintain who you are. People don't generally want to become exactly like the other person. And this can become very challenging because, especially in intercultural relationships, you see this because usually that once you add in the element of a different culture, there are a lot of hurdles or obstacles to overcome to stay connected. And when it comes to roles of men and women, or or how things are handled and what's important and what's not, cultures tend to be very different. And so they say that intercultural relationships are different, not just because of language or anything, because language might not be involved, but just because of this deep value system that feeds into how we see ourselves. So that's the face other dialectic. It's common to all relationships. We all want to support the other's identity, but of course we want to be our own person. It's just that you see it's most obvious in those intercultural relationships. We're not going to talk a ton about phenomenology this semester, but we will hit on Martin Buber's notion of dialogue. First thing you'll notice is that Martin Buber has an amazing beard. My goodness. Before it was cool, this guy was rocking it. So he came up with this concept of dialogue, and it's based around a contrast between I-it and I-thou. And I-it is a mindset or vision of yourself in relation to other people, where you're an I, you're important, right? You're the center. And the other person, however, is an it. They are just an object. They're not all that important. And so you monologue in conversations. If you have an I-it view of a relationship, then you're just going to monologue. You're going to talk at people. You're not necessarily trying to listen all that much or appreciate where they're coming from. You're talking in a one-way pattern. Even if the person is talking slightly in a two-way pattern, that might not indicate that there's dialogue. So for example, if you've ever been in a conversation with a salesperson, that salesperson you might start to feel like they just see you as a dollar sign, and they just want to close that sale, and so they start getting pretty pushy, like they're an I but you're an it. You're just an object, a resource, something that's either in their way or something that can help them. And so they might have a back and forth to try to make you feel happy and make you want to buy something, but it's really they call that a disguised monologue. Sometimes we disguise a monologue. There might be turn-taking and back and forth, but it doesn't mean you're really trying to hear them. That's contrasted with I-thou. I-thou is the opposite of I-it. In this instance, you are the I, and the other person is a thou. And that the word thou is a word that Martin Buber uses to describe seeing the other person as a unique creation. A human being, according to Martin Buber, is a special creation. Each individual human being has an inherent worth, a undeniable worth, because in his language, he's a Jewish religious philosopher. He said that because human beings are created in the image of God, we have to honor and respect where that person is coming from, and they deserve our attention. Each human being has an inherent dignity that we should respect and honor. So they're a thou. That's a very formal word, right? Thou. And so when you assume that about another person, when you assume that they are unique and special, that opens the world of dialogue. So the concept dialogue is about where you are listening to that other person, appreciating their opinion, listening to where they've come from, where their passions lie, where their interests are. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to agree with them. It just means that you respect them enough as a human being to hear them out, to consider where they're coming from. And that is opens the door for genuine back and forth dialogue between equal human beings. And when we're doing a dialogue the right way, Martin Buber says we're walking on a narrow ridge. And a ridge is the edge of a mountain. So let's say the two parts of the mountain come together, and there's that thin edge that goes up where the two edges meet. And a lot of times you'll see people in movies and in photos walking up that narrow ridge to the top of a mountain, especially when they're above the tree line. You just see that thin edge and you think, wow, if they took one step to the left or one step to the right, they'd probably slide down that mountainside. And that's the idea behind the narrow ridge. They're walking on a ridge, and they don't want to put both feet on only their side of the ridge, because then they're only appreciating, then you're back into I, it. You also don't want to put both feet onto the other side of the path and 100% just go along with what the other people say, because that's not dialogue either. There's an I and a thou, and so you are also created special. You also have an inherent dignity, and you belong in the dialogue as well, and your perspective is important, and it's important that we hear your perspective. So Martin Buber is a pretty neat guy, again, just like Burke. He uses a lot of religious terminology, although Martin Buber was a religious man, and communication field is obviously, it's not one that ignores or avoids religious terms. It's also not one that gravitates toward it on purpose. So sometimes you'll hear these perspectives in the mix, and I think they're really interesting. So that's one of the only phenomenology things that we'll discuss this semester, and that wraps up our discussion of the relationship.